The year is 1913. Zurich lies beneath a blanket of December snow, the kind that muffles all sound and transforms the world into something ancient and dreamlike. In a stone house overlooking Lake Zurich, a single window glows amber against the encroaching darkness. Inside, Carl Jung sits alone at his writing desk, surrounded by leather-bound volumes and the persistent tick of a grandfather clock. The fire in the hearth has burned low, casting trembling shadows along the walls like half-formed memories seeking recognition. Outside, the wind carries whispers across the frozen lake, whispers that sound almost like voices, almost like warnings. Jung has just severed ties with Sigmund Freud, his mentor, his father figure. He is 38 years old and descending into what he will later call his confrontation with the unconscious, a voluntary madness, a deliberate journey into the abyss of his own psyche. The air smells of ink, old paper, and the faint, comforting trace of wood smoke. He is not merely reading the mind, he is wrestling with it, his own most of all. Listen to the scratching of his pen across the page as he begins to document visions, to speak with figures that emerge from the depths of his mind, to draw mandalas in red leather journals. The respectable world thinks him mad. His colleagues whisper. His family worries, but Jung knows something they do not, that the darkness within us is not our enemy, but our teacher, our forgotten half, waiting patiently in the shadows for acknowledgement. You, who are lying there awake in the small hours, wrestling with thoughts you cannot silence, you understand this descent, don't you? You know what it means to feel haunted by aspects of yourself you cannot accept, cannot integrate, cannot even name. In your sudden anger, in your envy, in the way you replay old conversations, despising yourself for what you said or did not say, in the insomnia that claws at you when midnight has long since passed, but your mind refuses to release you. Tonight we will walk with Jung through the snow and into the labyrinth of the unconscious. Not to banish your darkness, but to understand it. Not to fear the shadow, but to recognize it as the orphan child of your psyche, banging on the basement door, asking simply to be seen, to offer you a strange, quiet comfort that your inner chaos is not a curse, but a map. Close your eyes, let the outer world fade. The journey into your shadow self begins. The year is 1913, and in the high mountains of Switzerland, winter settles like a heavy blanket over the world. The air is thin and sharp, carrying whispers of impending snow across the grey churning waters of Lake Zurich. In his stone study, Carl Jung stands before a window that frames this desolate beauty, watching ice form along the shoreline in jagged patterns that seem to mirror the fractures spreading through his own psyche. He is 38 years old, a man who should be in the prime of his intellectual life, yet he feels as though he is standing at the edge of an abyss. The silence in the room is not merely the absence of sound, it is the suffocating quiet of a life that has suddenly lost its structure. He has just severed ties with Sigmund Freud, not merely his mentor and colleague, but his intellectual father, the man who had called him his crown prince and heir to the psychoanalytic kingdom. For years, Jung had rested in the certainty of Freud's theories, sheltered by approval and professional security. But the soul is a stubborn thing, it will not suffer a lie forever. Jung knew that to follow another man's path was to lose his own, and so he chose the wilderness of intellectual independence. He has killed the father figure. He has burned the man. Now the adrenaline of rebellion has faded, leaving only the terrifying realization of his isolation. The professional world that once celebrated their partnership now whispers about Jung's instability, his betrayal, his descent into mysticism. His income becomes uncertain. His reputation hangs by a thread. The theoretical framework that had organized his understanding of human consciousness, Freud's sexual theory, the primacy of repression, no longer feels true to him. Yet he has nothing solid to replace it with. He stands in a void of his own making, having demolished the house he lived in without blueprints for rebuilding. I speak now to you, lying in the quiet darkness of your own room, wrestling with shadows on the ceiling. You know this vertigo, do you not? You understand the specific gravity of this moment when the ground beneath your feet turns to water. Perhaps you are feeling it tonight. That hollow ache in the chest when the career you spent a decade building suddenly feels empty. Or when the relationship you thought would define you dissolves into memory. It is the terrifying realization that the plan you followed, the one society promised would bring happiness, has failed you completely. This is what your anxiety often represents. Not random chemical malfunction, but your psyche's alarm system screaming that something is profoundly wrong. That you are living a life increasingly distant from your authentic nature. You have done everything right, checked every box, performed every duty, yet you lie here awake, wondering why everything tastes like ash. The metrics of success you have been chasing, productivity, efficiency, constant optimization of the self, begin to feel hollow. Yet you have no alternative framework to replace them. Present Jung's crisis as a mirror reflecting your own modern struggles with burnout and depression, with the particular exhaustion that comes not from working too hard, but from working toward goals that were never truly yours. Help yourself recognize that your current suffering, as unbearable as it feels in the 3 o'clock darkness, may not be pathology requiring pharmaceutical suppression, but transformation demanding space to unfold. Consider the comfort Jung eventually found in the ruins. When the structures of your life crumble, the certainties, the identities, the relationships, the beliefs, they may have been necessary scaffolding for an earlier stage of life, but have now become prisons preventing further growth. Your insomnia is not merely a medical condition to be medicated away, but the psyche's refusal to continue living a false life, creating uncomfortable space for something more authentic to emerge. This is the weight of winter. Not death, but gestation. In the frozen soil of your collapse, something unseen is quietly preparing to emerge. When the roof blows off the house of your ego, you are finally able to see the stars. There is profound solace in admitting you do not know where you are going. Tonight, do not try to fix your life or solve the puzzle of your future. Let the certainty shatter. Rest now in the wreckage. It is safer here than you think. The false self is gone, the silence is here, and in this silence, for the first time in a long time, you are free to simply be. When everything you thought you knew has been stripped away, you are finally free to discover who you actually are beneath the accumulated layers of others' expectations. The winter that feels endless is not permanent, but first you must survive the cold, must learn to sit with uncertainty, must develop the courage to descend into your own depths without the comfort of a map drawn by someone else. Close your eyes and drift backward through time to a Protestant parsonage in rural Switzerland in the year 1875. Here stands a large, echoing house that smells of old leather Bibles and unspoken sorrows, where a solitary child named Carl Jung plays alone in the garden, constructing tiny fortresses of stone while whispering secrets to the earth that he dares not speak to the living. His father, Johann Paul Achilles Jung, is a pastor whose faith crumbles quietly behind his pulpit. A man who delivers sermons about God while drowning in private doubt. His mother, Emily, drifts between tender domesticity and strange, distant moods, sometimes absent for nights without explanation, speaking occasionally in voices that seem not entirely her own. Young Carl learns early that there are two worlds, the daylight realm of propriety and Christian virtue, and the nocturnal realm breathing beneath the floorboards, full of secrets and forbidden truths. He develops what he will later call his number 1 and number 2 personalities, the obedient schoolboy who attends lessons and church services, and the ancient timeless sage who feels more kinship with stones and trees than with other children. This secret self experiences vivid, blasphemous visions of God defecating on the cathedral, shattering his childhood piety with images his conscious mind finds horrifying. The household atmosphere is heavy with what cannot be acknowledged. His father's crisis of faith creates a suffocating environment where spiritual doubt masquerades as rigid certainty, where questions are forbidden because they threaten the fragile structure holding the family together. Young Carl watches his father perform the rituals of belief while the man's soul withers, learning the terrible lesson that authenticity can be sacrificed for survival, that one can live an entire life wearing a mask while the true self dies in darkness. Now I speak directly to you, lying there in the quiet hours, wondering why you have always felt fundamentally different, fundamentally alone. Can you trace the moment when you learned to split yourself? It happened earlier than memory can capture, in those luminous years before language could contain it. There was a time, brief and golden, when you were simply yourself, unfiltered, unedited, expressing every emotion as it arose without shame or calculation. But then came the lessons. The moment your anger brought punishment or withdrawal of love, the day your sadness was dismissed as too much or attention-seeking, the afternoon your enthusiasm was mocked, your sensitivity ridiculed, your wildness deemed unacceptable. Perhaps your parents' own anxiety taught you that your needs were burdensome, that love was conditional upon emotional management, that certain parts of you were simply too dangerous to reveal. So you did what every child does to survive. You fractured yourself. You took the unacceptable parts, the neediness, the rage, the selfishness, the wild joy, and buried them deep. You created a persona of acceptability and wore it so consistently that you forgot it was a mask at all. You became the good child, the responsible one, the easy kid, and in doing so you exiled vast territories of your authentic self into shadow. This is the origin of the divided self that keeps you awake tonight. The exhaustion you feel is not random, it is the accumulated fatigue of decades spent as warden of your own soul, patrolling the corridors of your mind to ensure the unacceptable parts remain locked away. The imposter syndrome that haunts your days, the social anxiety that makes every interaction feel like a performance, the depression that settles over you like fog, these are not defects but scars from the original fracture. You learned to monitor yourself constantly, asking before each word, "Is this acceptable?" Will this make them uncomfortable? Am I being too much? You developed an internal critic whose voice echoes the first voices that taught you to hide. Perhaps a parent's impatience, a teacher's disappointment, a peer's mockery. But understand this with infinite gentleness. You are not broken. You adapted brilliantly to an impossible situation. The child you were made the only choice available to survive by concealment. Tonight, in the safety of darkness, you can begin to acknowledge what was lost, to whisper to that exiled child that it is finally safe to emerge. The fracture happened long ago, but the healing can begin now in this very moment as you breathe slowly and remember that wholeness is your birthright. The rupture comes slowly, then all at once, like ice cracking across a frozen lake. For years, Jung has walked carefully on the surface of his relationship with Freud, ignoring the hairline fractures spreading beneath his feet. But by 1913, the ice gives way completely, and Jung plunges into waters so cold and dark that he questions whether he will ever surface again. In his stone study overlooking Lake Zurich, the silence is no longer peaceful. It is the suffocating quiet of a man who has lost his intellectual father, his professional compass, his place in the world. Freud had been everything: mentor, collaborator, the brilliant mind who recognized Jung's potential when others dismissed him as a provincial Swiss doctor. Their correspondence had been love letters of the intellect, filled with mutual admiration and the intoxication of shared discovery. But the soul will not be silenced forever, and Jung's soul whispered increasingly insistent heresies. He could not reduce all human motivation to sexuality. He sensed dimensions of the psyche that Freud's theories could not contain: spiritual longings, mythological patterns, collective inheritances that transcended individual neurosis. The theoretical disagreements became personal wounds. To remain loyal to Freud meant betraying the voice of his own inner knowing. To honor his authentic vision meant losing everything he had built. So Jung makes the terrible choice. He walks away from borrowed certainty into the wilderness of his own truth. The psychoanalytic community turns against him like a family disowning a heretic. Former colleagues whisper about his instability, his descent into mysticism. His practice dwindles, invitations cease. The scaffolding of his professional identity collapses, leaving him standing alone in the ruins. But far worse than external isolation is the internal chaos that follows. Without Freud's theoretical framework to organize his understanding, Jung's psyche begins to hemorrhage strange visions, autonomous figures, overwhelming emotions he can barely contain. Ancient wise men appear in his study, speaking in voices not his own. He descends into caverns populated by serpents and mythological beings. Apocalyptic images flood his consciousness. Europe drowning in blood, civilizations crumbling, the collective unconscious erupting through the cracks of rational thought. Instead of fleeing this darkness, Jung does something extraordinary. He turns toward it with the curiosity of a scientist and the courage of a mystic. Each afternoon, after seeing his remaining patients, he retreats to his study and deliberately opens himself to the unconscious. He sits in silence, waiting, allowing images to arise without judgment or resistance. And they come, terrifying, magnificent, autonomous, speaking truths his rational mind could never have invented. Jung begins documenting these encounters in a large red leather folio, illustrating them with intricate mandalas and mythological imagery painted in brilliant colors. By flickering candlelight, he transcribes conversations with inner figures in beautiful calligraphic script, treating each vision as a sacred text. This becomes the Red Book, part diary, part grimoire, part illuminated manuscript of his soul's underworld journey. He is creating his own mythology because the inherited myths no longer suffice, mapping territories of consciousness that no explorer had dared to chart. Listen now, you who lie awake tormented by thoughts you cannot control, by images that disturb your carefully constructed peace. You have your own Red Book, do you not? Those spiraling anxieties at 3 in the morning when your mind presents scenarios of catastrophe and failure. Those intrusive thoughts that flash unbidden across your consciousness like unwelcome visitors. Those dreams so vivid and strange that you wake disoriented, unsure which world holds more truth. Modern psychiatry often seeks to eliminate these symptoms quickly, to restore normal functioning without asking what the symptoms might be trying to reveal. But Jung understood that sometimes breakdown is breakthrough, that the psyche must be dismantled before it can be reconstructed on more authentic foundations. Your dark nights of the soul are not evidence of malfunction, but invitations to your own depths, to territories of yourself that have been ignored, to truths that have been suppressed beneath the tyranny of productivity and performance. The chaos you feel is not the end, but the beginning, the necessary dissolution that precedes transformation. Jung emerged from his confrontation with the unconscious not broken but expanded, carrying maps of the human psyche that would illuminate millions of lives. Tonight, as sleep evades you, consider that your wakefulness might be purposeful. Stop fighting the visions. Stop dismissing the anxiety as meaningless static. Your unconscious has things to show you, and it will keep you awake until you finally agree to look. Descend willingly into your own Red Book, and trust that on the other side of this darkness lies a deeper, truer version of yourself, waiting patiently in the shadows to be born. Picture your consciousness as a single room in an ancient sprawling mansion, illuminated by one flickering candle whose weak flame casts a trembling circle of light upon the floor. This small, bright space contains everything you acknowledge as yourself, your values, your carefully constructed identity, your moral compass. You arrange the furniture of your personality here: the kind person, the responsible one, the rational thinker. This is your ego, the narrow beam of awareness that narrates your life, the voice that whispers, "I am good, I am competent, I am in control." But the mansion of your psyche extends infinitely beyond this single illuminated room. Down shadowed corridors you have never walked, behind doors you sealed long ago, in basements you pretend do not exist, dwells everything you have ever rejected about yourself. This is the shadow, not an abstract psychological concept, but a living, breathing presence, as real and autonomous as your conscious self. It is your dark twin, the orphaned sibling of your ego, who has lived your unlived life, felt every forbidden emotion, harbored every unacceptable thought. Jung discovered that the shadow is not merely personal debris, but a complete, organized personality dwelling in darkness. It grows more powerful the more vehemently it is denied, feeding on suppression like a plant thriving in rich, hidden soil. When you feel sudden flashes of rage that seem to come from nowhere, when envy cuts through you like a blade, when cruel thoughts arise unbidden, these are not random malfunctions, but communications from this shadow self, pressing against the locked doors of consciousness. Consider now, with the brutal honesty that only darkness allows, your own shadow territories, the fury you swallow when someone interrupts your carefully planned day, the spike of contempt when you encounter weakness in others that mirrors your own hidden vulnerabilities, the schadenfreude that warms you when someone you secretly envy experiences failure. These emotions arise and you immediately exile them, whispering, "I shouldn't feel this way," shoving them back into darkness before anyone, including yourself, can witness their existence. Your shadow knows your secret rehearsals, those midnight mental conversations where you destroy critics with the perfect comeback you were too civilized to deliver. It knows your hidden grandiosity, your desperate neediness, your capacity for pettiness and cruelty. It holds your sexual fantasies that shame you, your primitive desires for revenge, your longing to abandon all responsibility and disappear into anonymity. But here lies Jung's revolutionary insight: the shadow is not evil. It is simply human. More than that, it is the repository of your disowned vitality, your exiled power, your rejected authenticity. When you banish anger, you also banish healthy assertiveness. When you suppress selfishness, you also suppress necessary self-preservation. When you deny your capacity for cruelty, you also deny your ability to make difficult but essential decisions. The shadow contains not just your darkness, but your unused strength, your unexpressed creativity, your untapped reserves of passion. The exhaustion that keeps you awake tonight is not random. It is the accumulated fatigue of decades spent as both prisoner and guard in the jail of your own psyche. You monitor every word before speaking, analyze every action for hidden selfishness. Police your thoughts for unacceptable content. This internal warfare consumes enormous energy, leaving you depleted, anxious, forever vigilant against the uprising of your own authentic impulses. Tonight, I invite you to lay down your weapons in this civil war. The shadow is not your enemy, but your teacher. Not a demon to be exorcised, but an abandoned child knocking on the basement door, asking simply to be acknowledged. It does not seek to destroy you, but to be integrated, to finally come home after years of exile in the darkness of your own denial. Visualize now your shadow as a figure standing quietly at the edge of your candlelight. Do not turn away in fear. Look with curiosity rather than judgment. What gifts does it carry in its scarred hands? What wisdom has it gathered in its long banishment? This figure is not separate from you. It is you, the you that you abandoned to become acceptable, the you that has been waiting patiently in darkness for recognition. Breathe deeply and whisper to this shadow self with infinite tenderness, "I see you. I acknowledge you. Welcome home." In that quiet recognition, the architecture of your darkness begins to transform, and sleep finally becomes possible. In the ancient stone amphitheatres of Greece, actors would step onto the stage wearing large, exaggerated masks carved from wood and plaster. These personae, literally to sound through, were not merely costumes, but sacred instruments that amplified the human voice and projected archetypal characters to distant audiences. From this theatrical root springs our modern word personality. Yet Carl Jung understood that for most of us, the persona has become not an expression of our authentic self, but an elaborate prison. A compromise between who we actually are and who the world demands we must be. Picture yourself standing before a mirror each morning, performing an ancient ritual so habitual you no longer notice its crushing weight. You do not see your true face, but your carefully constructed performance. The practiced smile, the calculated neutrality, the diplomatic expression you learned to wear in rooms where your genuine feelings were unwelcome. This is your persona, what Jung called the social skin, grown slowly over your tender psyche like scar tissue over an old wound. As a child, you discovered which versions of yourself earned approval, and which brought punishment or withdrawal of love. Little by little, you learned to present only what was welcomed: competence, agreeability, emotional control, while hiding whatever made others uncomfortable. The angry child became mature. The sensitive one learned to laugh at their own pain before others could mock it. Thus, a mask more palatable than your soul formed, layer by careful layer, and society congratulated you for your successful adjustment. Yet this diplomatic ambassador of your psyche demands exhausting maintenance. You know this intimately, the sheer caloric energy required to monitor every word before speaking, every facial expression, every gesture for hidden unacceptability. For those of you with social anxiety, this calculation becomes a deafening roar, a constant surveillance system that transforms every interaction into a performance review. You curate your digital existence until it glows with filtered contentment while lying awake at 3 a.m, wondering why achievement tastes like ashes. Your Instagram life radiates success while your actual self suffocates beneath layers of careful construction. In corporate environments, the persona tightens into something particularly suffocating: the professional self who finds fulfillment in quarterly metrics, who describes soul-crushing meetings as productive synergy, who speaks in optimization jargon that distances you further from authentic human expression. You become a performance of productivity while your actual self withers in the fluorescent wilderness of endless efficiency. The tragic irony deepens: the more convincing your persona becomes, the more invisible you feel. People praise the mask, your reliability, your perpetual competence, your emotional stability, while compliments fall upon your surface, never reaching the frightened, yearning self underneath. A profound loneliness grows. Not the loneliness of lacking company, but the spiritual isolation of never being truly seen, of haunting conversations where no one speaks to who you really are. Jung warned that when identification with the persona becomes too complete, the shadow grows proportionally monstrous, crammed with every emotion and desire that cannot fit your narrow costume. The pressure builds in darkness, seeking release through panic, burnout, or inexplicable sadness that arrives like weather you cannot predict or control. But tonight, in this sanctuary where no audience watches, you can finally perform the ritual of removal. Feel the weight of the mask in your hands. Heavy, isn't it? All that accumulated performance carried on your face for years. Visualize unfastening the clasp behind your head, lifting away this elaborate construction as one removes armor after a punishing battle. Notice your jaw unclenching, your shoulders dropping, your breath deepening as the forgotten skin beneath meets cool air for the first time in memory. Here, at last, you need not be impressive, useful, or even coherent. The theatre is empty, the critics have departed, and you are alone in the most sacred sense. You can simply exist as the tired, complicated, beautifully flawed human you actually are. Rest now in the profound relief of not performing, trusting that tomorrow's mask will be lighter, more permeable to the authentic self, waiting patiently in the shadows to breathe. In the amber-lit sanctuary of his Zrick study, Jung often contemplated the peculiar way darkness travels between human souls. He understood that the shadow, denied direct expression in our own lives, possesses an almost supernatural cunning. It escapes through the back door of perception, painting itself upon the faces of others in colours so vivid we mistake them for objective truth. The psyche, it seems, will not be contained within the boundaries of a single consciousness, but leaks outward, transforming the world into an elaborate hall of mirrors where we see not others as they truly are, but distorted reflections of our own hidden landscape. Picture your mind as an ancient cinema, the kind with peeling velvet seats and dust motes drifting through cones of amber light. In the projection booth of your consciousness, a machine quietly spins, casting images drawn from your shadow, envy, rage, arrogance, desperate neediness onto the screen of the external world. Unable to acknowledge these qualities as your own, the projector turns outward, illuminating strangers and loved ones alike with your own disowned material. Suddenly, that colleague becomes unbearably arrogant, that friend insufferably needy, that distant public figure unforgivably hypocritical. You do not realize you are watching a film made entirely from your own exiled content. Consider now, with the brutal honesty that only solitude allows, the people who disturb you most profoundly. The colleague whose confidence triggers something visceral in you, not mere dislike, but a hot, irrational fury that seems disproportionate to their actual offense. They claim space in meetings without apology, speak with certainty that you secretly envy, and you find yourself mentally cataloguing their narcissism, their insufferable self-importance. But Jung would whisper a radical question into your midnight contemplations. What if this person carries your own disowned ambition? What if the confidence you despise in them is the very quality you exiled from yourself years ago when someone taught you that wanting recognition was shameful, that claiming your worth was unseemly? The mechanism operates with surgical precision, seeking in the external world what you cannot acknowledge internally. The friend whose emotional neediness exhausts you may be reflecting your own buried vulnerability, the desperate longing for care you learned to suppress beneath self-sufficiency. The family member whose weakness disgusts you may be carrying your own rejected fragility, the parts of yourself you cannot afford to acknowledge because your survival has depended on appearing strong. The intensity of your reaction is always the diagnostic. Mild annoyance suggests a minor shadow element, but visceral rage or obsessive contempt reveals a major disowned aspect of your psyche demanding recognition. In our digital age, projection has metastasized into collective madness. Social media has become a vast projection screen where millions cast their shadows upon strangers, where political figures become convenient repositories for our collective darkness, where we can righteously destroy others for possessing the very qualities we secretly harbor. The influencer you hate follow embodies some rejected part of yourself. The public figure whose every word enrages you has become a vessel for your own unacknowledged impulses. This is why forgiveness feels impossible. To forgive them would require forgiving yourself. And that remains the most terrifying prospect of all. But Jung offers a revolutionary possibility. Every strong reaction to another person is a doorway to self-knowledge, an invitation written in the language of emotion. When someone triggers you beyond proportion, the question is never, what is wrong with them? But rather, what is this revealing about me? This inquiry transforms enemies into teachers, conflicts into opportunities for integration, rage into the raw material of psychological growth. Tonight, as you lie reviewing the catalogue of people who have wronged you, disappointed you, enraged you, I invite you to a different practice. Bring to mind the person you resent most intensely. Feel the familiar heat of that resentment, the rehearsed arguments, the evidence you have accumulated of their fundamental wrongness. Now, with the courage that only darkness allows, whisper this radical question: what quality in them disturbs me so profoundly? And where have I exiled that same quality in myself? By reclaiming these projections, you perform two acts of liberation. First, you release others from the unfair burden of carrying your shadow, allowing you to see them more clearly as flawed humans rather than monsters. Second, you retrieve your own lost energy. Every projection is a piece of your soul given away, and by taking it back, by owning your own capacity for selfishness, arrogance, weakness, and rage, you become whole again. As you release your grip on these judgments, as you whisper forgiveness into the darkness, not for their sake, but for your own, the enemies dissolve. The projections fade like morning mist over still water. What remains is simply the quiet truth of your own complicated, contradictory, entirely human soul, finally able to rest in the acceptance it has always deserved. In the deepest caverns of your unconscious, where you have banished your rage and shame, something unexpected glitters in the darkness. Veins of pure gold running through the black stone of your shadow. Jung discovered this paradox with the wonder of an archaeologist unearthing treasure in a tomb. The same vault that contains your darkness also holds your most brilliant light, your most terrifying magnificence, your most profound genius. This is the golden shadow, the tragedy of human potential, buried not because it was shameful, but because it was too radiant, too threatening to the fragile economies of love and belonging into which you were born. Picture yourself as a child, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, standing in your living room, singing at the top of your lungs with unself-conscious joy, or painting with wild abandon across every surface, or declaring with absolute certainty that you would one day change the world. Your light was nuclear in its intensity, your confidence unshakable, your sense of possibility infinite. Then came the correction, swift, decisive, devastating. A parent, exhausted and seeking quiet, told you to stop making so much noise. A teacher, valuing conformity over creativity, criticized your drawing for being unrealistic. A peer, threatened by your natural authority, mocked your leadership as bossiness. An adult, uncomfortable with your intensity, labeled you too much. In that moment of shame, you learned the most dangerous lesson of childhood. Your brilliance was a weapon that wounded others. Your greatness was a burden that threatened your safety. Your authentic self was too large for the small spaces where love was dispensed. So you did what every child does to survive. You took your confidence, your artistic soul, your natural leadership, your intellectual daring, and you buried them in the same underground vault where you had already hidden your anger and selfishness. You decided it was safer to be small than to be seen, safer to be mediocre than to be magnificent. But the golden shadow does not disappear simply because it has been exiled. It haunts you through the peculiar alchemy of envy, that sharp, inexplicable pain you feel when encountering certain people who seem to effortlessly embody what you secretly long to become. Jung understood that envy is often a map, pointing not merely to what others possess, but to what you have disowned. The writer whose words flow with effortless grace triggers something deeper than admiration, a recognition of your own buried eloquence. The entrepreneur who pursues their vision without apology awakens not just jealousy, but grief for the dreams you abandoned. The friend who sets boundaries without guilt reflects your own exiled capacity for healthy self-assertion. This is the cruelest irony of the golden shadow. You spend your life feeling inadequate, convinced you are missing some essential quality, while your own magnificence languishes in the basement of your consciousness, waiting for permission to emerge. You suffer from what modern psychology calls imposter syndrome, not because you are a fraud, but because you are pretending to be smaller than you actually are. The anxiety that keeps you awake is often the tension of this compression, the energy of your greatness pushing against the walls you built to contain it. Modern culture complicates this exile further, celebrating only certain types of success while shaming other forms of brilliance. The quiet mystic, the deep listener, the gentle healer, the contemplative artist, these archetypes often retreat into shadow in a world that values only volume, speed, and extroverted achievement. Perhaps your golden shadow is not fame or fortune, but profound empathy, mystical intuition, or a capacity for stillness that terrifies a culture addicted to productivity. Jung discovered that integrating the golden shadow requires even more courage than facing your darkness. It is easier to confess your capacity for cruelty than to acknowledge your capacity for genius. Admitting you harbor rage merely confirms your worst fears about yourself, but admitting you possess untapped brilliance, natural leadership, or profound wisdom, this shatters the entire architecture of your self-concept and demands you actually step into the largeness you have spent a lifetime avoiding. Tonight, in the sanctuary of darkness where no one watches and judgment cannot reach you, I invite you to perform an act of radical reclamation. Ask yourself with brutal honesty, what have I always admired in others but insisted was impossible for me? What dreams did I abandon because they seemed too large for my small life? What compliments do I deflect because they feel dangerously true? Your resistance to these questions is the voice of the child who learned that claiming their light brought punishment. But you are no longer that child, and the old rules no longer apply. Visualize now descending into that luminous cavern beneath your everyday life, past the familiar demons of your fears, until you see a warm glow emanating from the depths. As you approach, the light intensifies, not alien energy, but your own forgotten vitality. Here sit the versions of you that never had a chance to live, the confident leader, the gifted artist, the natural healer, the visionary dreamer. One by one, let them place in your hands the gifts they have guarded all these years, not to burden you with action, but simply to remind you of what has always been yours. Whisper aloud the qualities you secretly possess, but dare not claim, I am brilliant. I am powerful, I am capable of extraordinary things. Feel how these words catch in your throat, how your psyche recoils from their audacity. That resistance is the last guardian of your exile, but tonight you can finally dismiss it with infinite tenderness. Your golden shadow has been waiting patiently in the darkness, not judging your cowardice, but understanding it, knowing you would reclaim it when you were ready. That time is now. Sleep in the knowledge that you contain not just depth, but blinding brightness. Not just flaws, but magnificence. Finally ready to welcome home the exiled light of your soul's true radiance. In the stone silence of your room, a familiar presence stirs, that restless creature pacing behind your ribs, tightening invisible fingers around your throat, sending electric tremors through your chest with the persistence of a caged animal demanding release. You know this visitor intimately, the sudden acceleration of your heart for no apparent reason, the spiral of catastrophic thoughts that arrive like vultures at dusk, the suffocating weight that settles over your lungs as though the very air has thickened against you. Modern medicine has taught you to regard this as malfunction, a chemical storm requiring pharmaceutical intervention, a glitch in your neurological wiring that must be silenced and subdued. Yet Carl Jung, sitting in his stone tower above Lake Zurich, listening to the wind carry ancient secrets across the water, understood something that contemporary psychiatry often forgets. Sometimes the alarm is not the emergency, but the warning. Sometimes the symptom is not the disease, but the cure trying desperately to break through. Picture your life as a carefully constructed city built upon the expectations of others. Streets paved with productivity, buildings erected from career obligations, bridges spanning between social performances. On the surface, everything appears orderly. You navigate the thoroughfares of daily routine, maintain the architecture of professional competence, keep the infrastructure of relationships functioning with practiced efficiency. But beneath these cobbled streets of conscious living flows a vast pressurized ocean, the realm of the unlived life, the repository of denied desires, the underground river of authentic selfhood that you have been systematically ignoring, redirecting, damming up in service of acceptability. Jung discovered that anxiety often begins as this ocean's gentle lapping against the foundations of your constructed life. At first, merely a vague unease before certain conversations, a tightening in your chest as Sunday evening approaches and Monday's obligations loom like grey monoliths. You tell yourself this is normal stress, that everyone feels this way, that you should be grateful for your circumstances. But the unconscious is both patient and relentless. When its whispered communications are ignored, its murmur becomes a siren. Its gentle pressure becomes a flood that bursts through the carefully sealed basement of your psyche, sending dark water spraying into the orderly rooms of your conscious. Existence. What if your anxiety is not random neurological misfiring, but your shadow's emergency broadcast system, the smoke detector of your soul screaming through the halls of consciousness, because somewhere in the house of your psyche a fire has started? The conventional approach treats anxiety as malfunction, rip out the alarm, silence the noise, return to the illusion of safety. But Jung asks a more unsettling and ultimately liberating question: what if the house is actually burning? What if your symptoms are not evidence of your brokenness, but proof of your psyche's desperate health, its refusal to let you continue sleepwalking through a borrowed life? Your anxiety arrives precisely when the gap between your authentic self and your performed existence becomes unbearable. The Sunday evening dread is not a disorder, but a signal that your work life has drifted irrevocably from your values. The social panic before gatherings is not cowardice, but sensitivity. Your psyche's recognition that these interactions demand you perform a false self, while your authentic nature suffocates beneath the mask. The free-floating dread about the future is often the ghost of the person you were meant to be haunting, the person you have settled for becoming. The unlived life pressing against the walls of the life you have actually chosen. Consider depression through this same revolutionary lens, not merely as chemical imbalance requiring pharmaceutical correction, but as what Jung called the weight of the unlived life. Every authentic impulse you suppress, every genuine desire you deny, every true word you swallow adds another stone to the invisible burden you carry. Depression becomes the accumulated grief of decades spent betraying yourself, your soul's mourning for the path not taken, the dreams abandoned, the voice silenced in favor of safety and approval. It is your psyche's way of forcing a pause, of making continued performance impossible, of creating space, however painful, for something truer to finally emerge from the wreckage of your carefully constructed compromises. The insomnia that torments you reveals its own sacred purpose when viewed through Jung's lens. During daylight hours, you maintain your persona with exhausting vigilance, keeping the shadow locked safely in the basement of consciousness. But when darkness falls and your defenses weaken with fatigue, the exiled aspects of yourself begin their nocturnal visitation. The thoughts you suppressed all day return with compound interest. The emotions you performed away resurface, demanding acknowledgement. Your unconscious has been waiting patiently for this moment when the gatekeeper finally tires, and it will not waste the opportunity. It keeps you awake not to punish you, but to speak to you, to show you what you have been refusing to see, to force a conversation that your daylight self has been postponing indefinitely. Tonight, I invite you to a radical reframing of your relationship with these symptoms. Instead of treating your anxiety as an enemy to be defeated, approach it with the curiosity of an archaeologist encountering ancient messages carved in stone. Place your hand on your racing heart and speak to it with infinite tenderness. I'm listening now. What have you come to tell me? What truth have I been too frightened to acknowledge? The anxiety may not immediately translate into coherent words. The unconscious speaks in images, in sudden memories, in bodily sensations that carry meaning beyond language. But in asking the question, you transform from victim to interpreter, from sufferer to student of your own depths. Imagine your anxiety not as a monster, but as a mud-covered messenger who has traveled through the dark forests of your unconscious to reach you. It arrives exhausted, urgent, carrying news from territories of yourself that have been abandoned, ignored, or exiled. The message may be that your creativity is dying from neglect, that your need for solitude is being systematically violated, that your spiritual hunger is being fed nothing but the empty calories of productivity and achievement. These realizations are frightening. Yes, they may demand that relationships end, that careers change, that the entire architecture of your carefully constructed life be dismantled and rebuilt on more authentic foundations. But here lies the profound comfort Jung offers. The moment you acknowledge the message, the messenger no longer needs to shout. The chest begins to loosen, the thoughts slow their frantic spinning. The insomnia that has held you hostage finally releases its grip. Your symptoms are not punishments, but invitations. Not evidence of your failure, but proof of your psyche's relentless commitment to your wholeness. They are the voice of your own soul, loving you too much to let you continue living a lie, willing to make you temporarily miserable if that is what it takes to make you permanently real. As you breathe slowly in the sanctuary of darkness, release the war against yourself. Your anxiety knows the way home. You need only stop running long enough to hear its directions whispered in the language of your racing heart. The cure is not silence, but translation, not suppression, but integration, not medication alone, but meaning. Listen now with the reverence due a sacred oracle, and watch how the waters of your distress begin to recede, revealing the solid ground of your authentic self, finally ready to support the weight of your true life. In the winter of 1913, as snow accumulated on the stone windowsills of his Rickstudy, Carl Jung performed an experiment so radical that revealing it to his colleagues would have earned him immediate institutionalization. He sat in his leather chair, closed his eyes, and deliberately invited the chaos of his unconscious to rise into awareness. But he did not merely observe these inner voices and visions, he engaged them as one would engage visitors at the door, asking their names, inquiring about their purposes. Listening with a careful attention, one offers foreign dignitaries bearing crucial intelligence from distant lands. This practice, which Jung called active imagination, was not meditation in the Eastern sense of emptying the mind, nor mere daydreaming or creative visualization. It was something far more dangerous and transformative, a disciplined descent into the underworld of the psyche. A negotiation with autonomous forces that possessed their own intelligence, their own agendas, their own stubborn refusal to be controlled by rational thought. Picture your mind not as the monologue of a single consciousness, but as a crowded theatre where most of the actors have been gagged, bound, and shoved into the basement, their muffled screams reaching you only as anxiety, depression, or inexplicable moods that arrive like weather systems you cannot predict or control. Jung understood that the figures populating your unconscious are not merely symbols or metaphors to be analyzed from a safe distance. They are autonomous complexes, fragments of psyche that have achieved genuine independence through years of exile and neglect. Your inner critic is not simply negative self-talk, but an actual personality dwelling in your depths, with its own history, its own wounds, its own reasons for the cruelty it inflicts. Your anxiety is not an abstract force, but a frightened guardian or vigilant protector, depending on how you choose to approach it. Tonight, I invite you into this ancient art of speaking with your demons. Begin by settling into the darkness of your room, letting your eyes close, allowing the boundary between waking and sleeping to soften like wax near flame. Visualize a safe space within your mind, perhaps a quiet library filled with ancient books, a stone room overlooking calm waters, or a forest clearing where dappled moonlight filters through ancient trees. In this sacred space, place 2 chairs facing each other. Settle into one and leave the other empty, waiting. Now, with deliberate intention, invite the presence that has been troubling you most persistently. Perhaps it is the anxiety that arrives each evening like clockwork, tightening invisible bands around your ribs. Perhaps it is the depression that settles over you like fog, muffling color and joy from the landscape of your days. Perhaps it is the procrastination that paralyzes you before important tasks, or the inner critic whose voice has narrated your life with such relentless judgment that you can no longer distinguish its commentary from objective truth. Do not try to visualize this presence in any particular form. Let it appear as it wishes. It may arrive as a shadowy figure, a frightened child, a stern judge, a wounded animal, or simply as a quality of atmosphere, a thickening of the air around certain emotional territories. When it manifests, resist your first impulse to push it away or analyze it from a safe distance. Instead, address it directly with the respect you would offer a stranger who has traveled far to speak with you. I see you. I acknowledge your presence. What is your name? Why have you come to me? The response may not arrive in words. The unconscious speaks a more ancient language than syntax. You might receive an image, a sudden memory from childhood, a physical sensation, or an emotion that floods through you without logical explanation. Ask your inner critic what it fears will happen if it stops its harsh vigilance. And you might be stunned to hear it reply not with malice, but with terror. I criticize you so you won't make mistakes that get us rejected. I am trying to keep you safe. Suddenly, the monster reveals itself as a misguided guardian, a terrified protector using cruel methods for a benevolent purpose. Engage your procrastination figure, and it might confess that it is actually paralyzed by perfectionism. Terrified that if you start important work, you will fail to meet impossible standards. By giving it voice, you discover that your laziness is actually a protective mechanism shielding you from the shame of inadequacy. The dialogue that follows must be genuine. The unconscious can sense manipulation or condescension with supernatural accuracy. You cannot trick these inner figures or control them through clever technique. As you practice this diplomatic congress of the psyche night after night, something miraculous occurs. The figures that once terrified you become familiar, their visits less violent, their messages clearer. Your anxiety, acknowledged and respected, no longer needs to scream, it can whisper. Your inner critic, understood as a wounded protector rather than an enemy, begins to soften its tone, offering guidance rather than condemnation. The monsters under your bed, given names and voices and the dignity of being heard, transform into allies, into guides, into aspects of yourself that can finally be integrated rather than eternally suppressed. Tonight, as sleep continues to elude you, stop fighting the thoughts and images that arise. Instead, turn toward them with curiosity and compassion. Speak to your demons as Jung spoke to his, with respect and courage and the willingness to be changed by what they reveal. In that conversation, in that brave turning toward rather than running from, the tyranny of the unconscious begins to dissolve. What was once chaos becomes communication. What was symptom becomes symbol. And what was enemy becomes the unexpected guide, leading you finally mercifully toward the wholeness that has been waiting patiently in the shadows all along, ready to welcome you home. In the stone tower of Bollingen, where Lake Zurich laps against ancient foundations, Carl Jung kept a collection that would have puzzled his rational colleagues. Leather-bound alchemical manuscripts, filled with cryptic engravings of dragons consuming their own tails, hermaphroditic figures, representing the marriage of opposites, and elaborate diagrams mapping the transformation of base metals into gold. While the scientific world dismissed these medieval texts as primitive chemistry, Jung recognized them as the first maps of psychological transformation. The alchemists were never really trying to transmute lead into physical gold. They were describing the far more precious process of transforming the fragmented, wounded self into an integrated, whole human being. Integration, Jung discovered, follows the same pattern as alchemical transformation. First comes the nigredo, the blackening. The necessary descent into chaos where everything you thought you knew about yourself must be dissolved. This is the crisis that has brought you to these midnight hours, when your carefully constructed identity crumbles and the shadow erupts through the floorboards of consciousness. You experience this as breakdown, as the terrifying sensation that you are coming apart at the seams. But the alchemists understood this dissolution as essential. You cannot transform what you refuse to acknowledge. The shadow material you have spent decades suppressing must be brought into the light, examined with unflinching honesty, felt in all its uncomfortable intensity. This means sitting with the rage you have always denied, tasting the bitterness of your envy, acknowledging the pettiness that coexists with your compassion. You must confess the revolutionary truth. You are not the simple, morally consistent character you have pretended to be, but a complex, contradictory collection of impulses, some noble and some decidedly less so. The second stage, the albedo or whitening, arrives when you begin separating what is authentically yours from what you have merely inherited or absorbed. You must distinguish your genuine desires from the ambitions others planted in you, your real voice from the chorus of internalized critics that have been speaking through you for decades. This purification is not about becoming good, but about becoming real, stripping away borrowed identities until only the essential self remains. But here lies the revolutionary heart of Jung's vision. Integration does not mean eliminating the shadow or transcending your darkness. It means expanding your sense of self to include everything you have rejected. Imagine your ego as a small circle of light that has been desperately trying to maintain its boundaries, to keep the darkness at bay. Integration means allowing that circle to stretch until it encompasses territories you once considered enemy. Your sense of "I must grow large enough to whisper, yes, I contain anger," without immediately adding, "but I'm not an angry person." Think of your psyche as a parliament where every aspect of yourself deserves a seat. For years, you have been a tyrannical dictator, allowing only the acceptable members, the polite, the productive, the rational to speak, while locking the opposition in the dungeon. Integration is unlocking that dungeon, inviting the exiled members back into the chamber and listening to what they have to say. The angry part may carry necessary wisdom about boundaries. The lazy part may be advocating for essential rest. The envious part may be pointing toward your unlived potential. This is profoundly uncomfortable work. Your psyche has been organized around binary thinking, good or bad, acceptable or unacceptable. Integration demands that you abandon these neat categories and learn to live in the gray territory where most actual human experience occurs. You must make peace with being simultaneously strong and fragile, confident and insecure, loving and occasionally resentful. The final stage, the rubedo or reddening, represents the birth of the integrated self, what Jung called individuation. This is not perfection, but wholeness, not the elimination of conflict, but the capacity to contain it. The gold produced by this alchemical process is not superficial success, but the deep, authentic richness of a life lived in full acknowledgement of your complexity. Tonight, as you lie in the alchemical vessel of your bed, allow the heat of awareness to soften the rigid boundaries of your self-concept. Breathe deeply and whisper the truths you have been avoiding. I am sometimes selfish. I am occasionally cruel, and I am also kind. I am capable of profound generosity. The integrated self holds both simultaneously, refusing to collapse into either shame or grandiosity. This is the alchemical gold Jung promised, not the elimination of your struggles, but the transformation of your relationship to them. The exhausting effort of maintaining impossible consistency can finally cease. You are allowed to be human, which means you are allowed to be contradictory, complicated, and occasionally incomprehensible even to yourself. In that permission, the tight bands around your chest begin to loosen, and sleep, that nightly rehearsal for dissolution, finally becomes possible. The gold you have been seeking was forged in the darkness you feared, waiting only for the courage of your acceptance to shine. In the most sacred chamber of your unconscious, where moonlight has never touched stone, and silence holds the weight of eternity, two thrones sit side by side in the great hall of your soul. One throne bears the crown of your conscious identity, the self you present to the world, polished and familiar. The other remains draped in shadows, occupied by a presence you have spent your entire life seeking in the faces of strangers, in the arms of lovers, in the promise of someone who will finally, mercifully, complete you. Jung called this mysterious other your anima if you are a man, your animus if you are a woman, but these terms gesture toward something far more universal than gender, toward the contrasexual soul image that dwells in every human psyche, waiting for recognition, aching for reunion. You know this longing with the intimacy of your own heartbeat, that hollow ache in your chest at 3 a.m. The sense that some essential piece of your existence has been misplaced, scattered across 1,000 failed connections and disappointed hopes. You scroll through faces on screens, searching desperately for the one who will understand you without explanation, who will fill the void that echoes through your midnight hours like wind through abandoned rooms. But Jung whispers a revolutionary truth across the decades. The beloved you seek externally already dwells within you, exiled in the depths of your own unconscious, banished not through cruelty, but through the tragic necessity of growing up in a world that demanded you choose sides in a war between masculine and feminine, thinking and feeling, strength and tenderness. For those raised to embody traditionally masculine qualities, the kingdom of logic, achievement, stoic endurance, the anima represents all that was sacrificed on the altar of acceptability. She is your capacity for intuition, for emotional depth, for the receptive stillness that simply allows rather than constantly doing. She appears in dreams as mysterious women whose faces you cannot quite recall upon waking, in waking life as inexplicable moods that flood through rational defenses like water through cracks in a dam. You have spent your life building empires of accomplishment while she languishes in the tower of your unconscious, your tenderness and vulnerability locked away because the world taught you these qualities were weakness rather than wisdom. For those who learned to embody traditionally feminine qualities, the realm of nurturing, accommodation, emotional labor, the animus represents the rejected masculine, the sword of discrimination that can say no without guilt, the capacity for clear boundaries, the authority to claim space without apologizing for your existence. He appears sometimes as harsh inner criticism, but also as untapped reserves of leadership, ambition, and intellectual clarity. You have spent your life making yourself small, caring for others, while he waits in exile, your power and assertiveness buried beneath layers of learned self-effacement. Yet the syzygy, this sacred union of opposites, transcends these binary categories entirely. It represents any quality you have exiled as not me, any aspect of human wholeness you have projected onto others because you could not acknowledge it as your own. The logical person who has rejected their emotional depths, the feeling type who has dismissed their capacity for rational analysis, the extrovert who has buried their need for solitude, the introvert who has denied their desire for recognition. This is why relationships so often disappoint with the violence of betrayal. You fall in love not with the actual person, but with your own projected anima or animus, demanding they carry qualities you refuse to develop in yourself. When they inevitably fail to sustain the weight of your projection, when they reveal themselves to be merely human rather than archetypal, the magic dies and resentment blooms in its place. The loneliness that keeps you awake tonight is not really about lacking another person. It is about the internal exile of your own contrasexual other, the divorce within your own soul. Jung discovered that the inner marriage must precede the outer one. Tonight, in the sanctuary of darkness where no audience watches, perform the ceremony of recognition. Visualize that empty throne in the great hall of your psyche. Invite the exiled other to emerge from shadow, to take their rightful place beside your conscious self. Speak to this inner beloved with the reverence of a lover reuniting after long separation. I see you. I have sought you in every face but your own. Come home now. As you acknowledge this sacred union, the desperate seeking quiets, the loneliness transforms from absence into fullness. You are not half a person awaiting completion, but a universe unto yourself, containing both sun and moon, action and receptivity, strength and tenderness. Rest now in this revolutionary wholeness, knowing you are never truly alone, because you carry the beloved within, waiting patiently in the depths for your recognition, ready finally to dance in the eternal marriage of your soul.
In the summer of 1914, as Europe basked in the confidence of its civilized progress, Carl Jung was tormented by visions that seemed to herald madness. Apocalyptic images of blood flooding across continents, of rational nations drowning in crimson barbarism. When the First World War erupted weeks later, transforming his nightmares into mechanized reality, Jung understood with chilling clarity that he had not witnessed personal psychosis, but the eruption of humanity's collective shadow. The darkness shared by entire civilizations, festering beneath the
veneer of enlightenment until it exploded with volcanic fury across the carefully manicured gardens of European culture. You, lying in your solitary darkness, wrestling with anxieties that feel overwhelmingly personal, are quietly plugged into this same vast circuit of collective unconsciousness. Your despair about the state of the world, your sense of civilizational collapse, your midnight scrolling through endless streams of human cruelty. These are not merely individual neuroses, but your soul's recognition that you are a single nerve ending in humanity's larger nervous system. Registering pains that are simultaneously personal and planetary, just as you create a personal persona and exile unacceptable traits into individual shadow. Societies construct collective identities and banish contradictory qualities into cultural darkness. The civilized Europeans of Jung's era believed they had transcended their savage past through reason and Christian morality, projecting their capacity for violence onto primitive peoples, their irrationality onto women and the mad, their darkness onto anyone who could be labeled other. Yet Jung witnessed how swiftly this collective shadow erupted, how professors who lectured on ethics became architects of genocide, how nations that praised humanitarian values descended into mechanized slaughter. This same mechanism operates in your contemporary world with terrifying precision. Nationalism projects evil onto other nations, transforming complex realities into simplistic narratives of good versus evil. Political polarization becomes collective shadow work gone catastrophically wrong, each side seeing in the other only darkness, refusing to acknowledge how their own unexamined impulses mirror what they claim to despise. Social media functions as a vast projection screen where millions enact these dynamics in real time, hurling their disowned aggression at convenient enemies, their repressed envy at the successful, their denied vulnerability at the weak. The environmental crisis reveals perhaps the most profound collective shadow of industrial civilization, humanity's construction of an identity around mastery and endless growth, while exiling into shadow our vulnerability, our dependence on natural systems, our animal nature. We project consciousness only onto humans, while treating the living earth as dead matter to be exploited. Climate emergency is not merely technical failure, but the return of the repressed nature herself, demanding recognition after centuries of being treated as humanity's shadow. But Jung whispers a revolutionary truth across the decades. Your personal shadow work is not merely self-help, but contribution to collective healing. Every time you acknowledge your own capacity for prejudice, you withdraw one thread from the fabric of systemic hatred. Every time you own your own aggression, you cease feeding the collective violence. Every time you integrate a fragment of your personal darkness, you perform microscopic surgery on the body politic, removing one cell of the cancer metastasizing through human civilization. Tonight, expand your perspective beyond the narrow concerns of individual suffering. You are not isolated consciousness, but a wave in an ocean of collective psyche, carrying currents that flow through generations, through cultures, through the entire human species. Your anxiety connects you to the great river of human experience, to ancestors who wrestled with their own collective shadows, to future generations who will inherit the consequences of this era's choices. As you breathe slowly in the darkness, feel yourself expanding beyond the boundaries of skin, becoming porous to the larger movements of history. Your personal healing radiates outward like ripples on still water. By making peace with your own darkness, you participate in the slow, difficult work of collective transformation. One conscious breath at a time, dissolving the ancient shadows that have haunted our species since we first learned to fear our own darkness cast by firelight in primordial caves. In the winter of 1928, a woman enters Jung's consulting room carrying the weight of a mind too rigid in its rationality, too armored against mystery. As she recounts a dream involving a golden scarab, ancient symbol of transformation and rebirth, Jung hears an impossible sound, gentle tapping at the window behind him. When he opens it, a rose Schaefer beetle, Europe's closest equivalent to the sacred scarab, flies directly into the room and alights upon his desk. In that luminous moment, when the inner world of dream and outer world of matter briefly touched, Jung glimpsed what he would spend decades exploring: synchronicity, the causal connecting principle, suggesting that beneath the mechanical universe we think we inhabit flows a deeper order where meaning, not mere causation, weaves events into patterns that speak directly to the soul's journey. You know these moments with the intimacy of held breath, the friend whose name surfaces unbidden in your thoughts seconds before they call. The book that falls open to precisely the passage you needed. The stranger whose casual comment contains the exact answer to a question you have wrestled with. In sleepless solitude, your rational mind dismisses these as statistical inevitability, random collision in a universe of chaos. But something deeper recognizes the fingerprints of meaning, the sense that invisible threads connect seemingly separate events in configurations that transcend mere coincidence. Jung understood synchronicity as the temporal collision of inner psychological state and outer circumstance, not one causing the other, but both arising from what he called the unus mundus, the unified reality underlying apparent separation between mind and matter, self and world. These meaningful coincidences cluster most densely around moments of psychological transformation, appearing with uncanny frequency when you stand at crossroads, when old identities dissolve and new selves struggle toward birth. Tonight, as you lie suspended between waking and sleeping, consider that your very insomnia might be synchronistic, arriving precisely when you need to confront your shadow, when the universe has conspired to strip away defenses and force uncomfortable but necessary transformation. Perhaps your anxiety is not random malfunction, but meaningful symptom. Your depression, not chemical accident, but soul's refusal to continue living inauthentically. The timing of your crisis, the particular form of your suffering, the specific people who have wounded or awakened you. What if none of this is accident, but participation in a larger pattern you cannot yet perceive from your current vantage point?
This recognition demands not magical thinking but radical trust, the wisdom of releasing white-knuckled control over outcomes you were never meant to direct. Modern culture teaches you that success requires total self-determination, that failure represents insufficient willpower. But synchronicity whispers a subversive comfort. You are not isolated consciousness battling chaotic forces, but a participating node in an intelligent web where your deepest authenticity aligns with currents larger than individual ambition.
Imagine yourself as a leaf released into a stream, no longer swimming against current, but trusting water's ancient knowledge to carry you toward destinations your conscious mind could never plan. This surrender is not passive resignation, but active collaboration with the mystery of your own unfolding. Just as you cannot force sleep through sheer determination, you cannot control the timing and trajectory of your transformation. Tonight, release your desperate grip on how life should unfold. Trust that the universe organizes itself in your favor even when patterns remain obscured by present confusion. Your struggles are not evidence of cosmic indifference, but proof of participation in transformation larger than individual consciousness can comprehend. Rest now in this mystery, knowing you are exactly where you need to be, held by invisible threads woven through darkness, guided by synchronicities you will recognize only in retrospect. When you finally understand that every apparent accident was actually appointment, every breakdown was breakthrough disguised, every dark night preparation for dawn you could never have imagined from midnight's depths, let go of the oars. The river knows the way home. As dawn breaks over Lake Zurich, painting the ancient stones of Jung's tower in gradients of amber and rose, the profound work of darkness does not end, but transforms into the patient labor of daylight integration. The revelations glimpsed in Midnight Sanctuary must now be carried into the ordinary world of breakfast conversations and commuter trains, of meetings that drain the soul and moments that unexpectedly restore it. Jung understood that shadow work is not a heroic descent followed by triumphant return, but a daily practice as essential as breathing, as continuous as the lake's eternal dialogue with the shore. A lifetime commitment to conscious living in a world that rewards unconsciousness. Begin each day not by immediately surrendering to productivity's tyranny, but by honoring the night's communications. Keep a journal beside your bed like a faithful companion. And before rational thought fully awakens to remake the world in familiar categories, capture whatever fragments of dreams still cling to consciousness like morning mist on water. Do not analyze or interpret these nocturnal messages, simply receive them as letters from your shadow, written in the symbolic language that predates words, that speaks in images older than civilization itself. As you prepare for the day's performance, notice the subtle constriction as your persona slides into place. The practiced smile, the rehearsed responses, the carefully modulated voice that will carry you through social interactions. Instead of condemning this necessary mask, bow to it with respect as you would acknowledge a skilled diplomat. But whisper quietly to yourself the revolutionary sentence that loosens invisible chains: "This is not all of me." In that simple recognition, you create an inner sanctuary that the outside world cannot fully occupy. A private chamber where your unloved parts can breathe without judgment or apology. Throughout your day, practice what Jung called psychological mindfulness. Not the Eastern emptying of thought, but Western attention to the movements of your own psyche. When strong emotion suddenly floods through you, pause before habitual suppression takes hold. Each spike of feeling is a bell tolling from the depths, announcing the arrival of unconscious material seeking recognition. Ask with genuine curiosity rather than harsh judgment, "What has been triggered within me? Is this response proportional to the present situation, or am I reacting to something older, deeper, still unresolved?" That flash of rage, when interrupted, may connect to childhood experiences of invisibility. The sudden anxiety before speaking may echo ancient shame about claiming space in the world. By tracing emotional reactions to their roots, with the patience of an archaeologist, you transform unconscious compulsion into conscious choice. Automatic reaction into deliberate response. Notice particularly your projections as they occur in real time. Those moments when someone triggers disproportionate reaction. When admiration tastes bitter with envy. When irritation burns with inexplicable intensity. Resist the reflexive impulse to justify your judgment or catalogue their flaws. Instead, turn the lens inward and ask Jung's revolutionary question. What quality in them disturbs or fascinates me so profoundly? And where have I exiled that same quality within myself? This practice gradually withdraws your scattered projections, allowing you to see others more clearly while reclaiming your own dispersed energy, piece by precious piece. Living with wholeness means practicing a gentler justice toward yourself when integration fails. When shadow material erupts despite your best intentions. You will still lose your temper at inappropriate moments, still feel the sharp blade of envy cutting through your chest, still catch yourself in petty cruelty or moments of moral cowardice. When these failures occur, and they will occur with the reliability of weather, resist the savage reflex of self-attack that once served as your primary form of self-regulation. Instead, approach yourself as you would a frightened child who has acted out from pain rather than malice. Ask with infinite tenderness, what wound were you protecting? What need went unmet that caused this eruption? Accountability remains essential, but shame softens into understanding. Punishment transforms into curious investigation. Over time, this inner climate change, from condemnation to compassion, reduces the frequency with which your shadow must seize dramatic control simply to be noticed and acknowledged. Create deliberate space in your structured days for what Jung called active imagination, those conversations with inner figures. Those negotiations with autonomous complexes dwelling in psychological depths. Perhaps 10 minutes of sitting quietly, inviting your anxiety to speak its underlying concerns. Asking your procrastination what it fears will happen if you actually succeed. Listening to your inner critic's protective intentions beneath its harsh methodology. These dialogues need not be elaborate rituals, but simple acts of internal hospitality. Making conscious room for exiled aspects seeking recognition and integration. Learn to trust the natural rhythm of your own energy, accepting that you are seasonal rather than mechanical, tidal rather than constant. Sometimes you will expand into the world with action and achievement, other times you will contract into solitude and rest. Stop apologizing for your need to withdraw, recognizing it as necessary inhalation before the exhalation of engagement. You are not a machine designed for perpetual output, but a living organism requiring periods of dormancy, reflection, and renewal. As you acknowledge your own darkness, you lose the compulsive need to project it onto others. You become slower to judge, harder to scandalize, more capable of witnessing human frailty without recoiling in horror or superiority. People sense something different in your presence, not because you have achieved perfection, but because you have stopped pretending to possess it. Your authenticity becomes a quiet permission slip for others to be equally complicated, equally contradictory, equally human. This work transforms every interaction, from intimate partnerships to casual encounters. When you own your contradictions, you make space for loved ones to be flawed without triggering your need to fix or change them. Your relationships deepen because they become based on reality rather than projection, on acceptance rather than the exhausting demand for perfection that kills genuine intimacy. Tonight, as you prepare once more for sleep's nightly dissolution, review your day not with harsh judgment, but with the gentle curiosity of a scientist observing natural phenomena. Where did your shadow appear? What did you learn about the hidden geography of your psyche? What remains unintegrated, waiting patiently for tomorrow's attention? Visualize yourself not as a project requiring repair, but as a landscape to be explored with wonder, containing mountains of ambition and valleys of grief, rivers of creativity and deserts of necessary solitude. The goal is not to eliminate the tension between light and shadow, but to develop the capacity to contain both simultaneously, to become spacious enough to hold your contradictions without fracturing under their weight. You learn to whisper the uncomfortable truth that is also the ultimate liberation. I am sometimes selfish and sometimes generous, occasionally cruel and often kind, capable of profound love and petty resentment, and all of this is simply what it means to be gloriously, messily, authentically human. This daily practice becomes the quiet revolution that transforms your life from the inside out. One conscious breath, one acknowledged darkness, one moment of radical self-acceptance at a time. There is no final state of perfection to achieve, only the deepening capacity to hold it all with grace. The war with yourself is over, not because you have won, but because you have finally stopped fighting. Rest now in this revolutionary wholeness, knowing you are enough not because you are flawless, but because you are complete, a masterpiece of light and shadow unfolding in perfect, imperfect time. Return now to that stone house overlooking Lake Zwick, where our journey began in winter's depth. The season has shifted imperceptibly, not towards spring, but towards something deeper than winter itself. The fire in Jung's hearth has burned down to glowing embers, each coal breathing its last light like a small, patient star surrendering to darkness. The frantic scratching of pen across parchment has ceased. The visions that once terrified him with their intensity have quieted to gentle whispers, satisfied that they have been heard, content that they have been seen. Outside the window, snow continues its ancient conversation with the earth, each flake unique and temporary, each part of the vast whiteness blanketing the world in profound silence. The lake has begun its slow transformation toward ice, the boundary between water and solid matter softening, blurring, becoming something neither and both. The distinction between inside and outside, between Jung and his shadow, between consciousness and unconsciousness, all of these boundaries begin to soften like wax near flame, like breath on cold glass fading back into invisibility. You too can feel this softening now, can you not? The fierce grip you have maintained on your identity throughout this long night begins to loosen like fingers releasing their hold on a rope they no longer need to climb. Your name becomes just a sound, arbitrary and distant. The problems that seemed so urgent hours ago reveal themselves as thoughts, just thoughts, rising and falling like waves on that distant lake, requiring nothing from you but the simple acknowledgement of their passage. Your shadow sits quietly at the edge of your bed, no longer a monster but a companion, a faithful guardian who has watched over you through all the years of your forgetting. It is the dark earth that holds the roots of the tree, the velvet night that allows the stars to shine, the silence that gives meaning to sound. You do not need to fight it anymore. You do not need to fix it. You and your darkness breathe together in the slow, rhythmic cadence of approaching sleep. There is nothing now to solve, nothing to analyze, nothing to integrate. The work of consciousness can rest. Feel the heaviness in your limbs, that pleasant, sinking weight pulling you down into the mattress, anchoring you to the earth. The mask you wore all day has been unclasped and set aside. What remains is simply you, naked of pretense, stripped of performance, resting in the quiet truth of your own existence. Listen now to the quality of silence in your room. It is not the silence of absence, but the silence of completion, the quiet that arrives when all necessary words have been spoken. Thoughts appear like small ripples on dark water, then spread, then vanish into stillness. Even the idea of you grows softer, more translucent, dissolving like salt in water. There is nothing to fix. There is nothing to prove. There is nowhere you must go. There is no one you must be. You are sinking now, not drowning but descending gently, like snow settling onto the surface of that lake. The you that has been so afraid, so vigilant, can finally let go, can trust the deeper waters to hold what consciousness cannot carry. Down and quieter. Down and softer. Down, where the mind loosens and the shadow curls at your feet like a faithful animal, and the lake of your being lies utterly still beneath the vast unjudging night. Just this breath and this darkness, this perfect letting go